The kind of work that I've been doing addresses the legacy and the history of African American farms and gardens. And I do that because of my own history. One of the things that I did in the last several years was just take a road trip, discovering these places, these legacy farms, because they have been in these families for decades, since Reconstruction and all the way up through the Great Migration. The fact that many of these farms have remained in the same families. And I think of them as just places that just represent a kind of courage. And also the fact that they are sustained over time by these families and contribute to our culture. And so my work addresses the fact that they have not actually been acknowledged by visual artists to the extent that I think that they should be, because they do provide this incredible rich resource of imagery. So the idea that you have a couple or their children who have been on this land for so long and that they're able to continue and pass that along, that's important because land in our culture represents a certain kind of longevity. It is the beginning of wealth, if you will, and respectability, that whole idea of having land. So I like to acknowledge that in the work. In addition to making this art, I teach at Swarthmore College, and I get to interact with students from so many different kinds of backgrounds. And that whole idea of the narrative, which is so important, is something that I get to explore with them. It's this idea of clay as this very kind of vital medium that is able to represent and to provide us with a voice to express our feelings and our thoughts and our experience.
I think not using tools when you do clay, there's a parts there like just enough that I bring some level of like whimsical figures, and I think there's a right touch to bring sweetness to it. Probably it's frustrating to look at my figure if you're into like a super realistic way of a figure. So I use stoneware clay, but I fire to low temperature. I want to reglaze more and more, so when it's vitrified, they're gonna have a hard time taking glazes. When I took art courses, especially ceramics, I found the thing, I guess, and every time I wake up, I just can't wait to go to school. I didn't know what the ceramics career can be, and I didn't know what the future is going to be, but I just like to get out of bed and go to studio and start making stuff. I guess you can say it's a very tedious process. There's no faster way to do it. You just do it a certain way in certain things because you like that way, and I think that's totally fine. Important thing is your work is always somehow it's yours. If you pretend to be somebody else or something else, that just never works out. Teaching at the college and teaching a workshop is very different, and always teaching wasn't my goal, but if this class will be the eye-opening to the students, and if they see what am I doing as a studio artist, and hopefully that'll inspire students to jump into this kind of life.
And I think one of the things about problem solving, about what you want to make and how you want to make it, is to keep notes. So in the studio I have a small notebook because of course, I am always trying stuff that's new, and the first ones never work out the way I want them to. But when you get one that's a winner, you want to remember how you made it. I went to Penland and saw Jeff Astrike throwing on a Leach wheel, and I just became enthralled with the Leach philosophy, making things of utility that were also beautiful. I also started thinking more about making the pots refer to the figure. So when I talk about adding skirts and adding hips and and expressing them as far as like making them so they're open and generous, I'm still thinking a lot about human characteristics that I'm trying to maybe not be too literal with, but it's things that I'm thinking about. So I spend a lot of my time in the garden during the summer, and I grow a lot of flowers, so I'm thinking a lot about what kind of flowers the vases are for, and that can have to do with scale and forms. I can't say enough about craft schools because it's where I trained. I came to clay because I like to cook. And I saw this woman throwing at a craft show, and I said, I want to learn how to do that. And I feel lucky because I've studied in both camps. I was a core student at Penland, and then I went to graduate school for an MFA in ceramics. So I feel like I got the academic training and then the craft school training, which are both very valuable.
I have I've developed kind of a different way of thinking about art, teaching art. And my thinking is becoming more and more about bringing people back to their traditional arts as far back as possible. This is an ancient Southwestern technique that I picked up when we lived out in Arizona and New Mexico, where these sherds are just, in some places they're just all over the ground. Still there. Something about the Southwest, it's like our Mother Earth is bare there, and somebody dropped something 500 years ago. It could still be there on the surface. The younger archaeologists are so different than a lot of the older archaeologists that would come in and basically want to teach the Indians about who the Indians were. And there's something really amazing that happens when you're sitting there around a fire and there's a pot boiling and bubbling, one of the pots you made, with food in it, and the smell's coming from that. And it's like you're seeing something that your ancestors saw, exactly what they saw. The wood, the coals, the heat, feeling the heat from the fire, the boiling of food in these old pots. And something happens, something stirs, which I think a lot of our indigenous people have felt when they get to do this. So to me, the artwork is one thing for me, doing these pieces of art, which is wonderful. But there's something else going on too.